You see, nature's made some parasites so bloody deadly that even horror movies had to take inspiration. And if you think about it, the scariest monsters aren't giant beasts. They're mostly tiny parasites and micro-organisms. And when these creatures take control of your body, when they hijack your body, rewrite your instincts, or turn you into a walking delivery system for their next victim, well, that's it for most folks. You often find yourself turned into a super-crazed, uber-violent killer. Think about aliens like The Thing and The Long One. We should definitely be glad that these are just movie monsters. And in this video, I'm going to talk about the 10 monster parasites that turn their hosts into killing machines. Let's begin, shall we? The Long One, Slither slugs. Slither, 2006. In Slither, a meteorite falls into the rather quaint and sleepy town of Wheelsy, South Carolina. Like, you could think about it maybe as Derry or Hawkins, but without Pennywise or Vecna. But then, like almost any sleepy suburban town with residents who know each other, this place becomes a hellhole because the meteorite that crashed here was actually carrying an alien organism. A seemingly small and almost cute beast with immense potential and the singular goal to multiply and take over Earth before moving on to another planet altogether. A wealthy and rather grumpy resident named Grant finds it first. The creature fires what I can best describe as an organic harpoon into him because the creature wanted to pass a bit of its DNA into Grant's body. This transfer of DNA is pretty much the first stage in the Long One's pretty long life cycle. Gradually, the alien mind takes more and more control, and the host develops a hunger for red meat before starting to gather flesh, even from roaming animals. Grant, under the control of the alien parasite, then moves to its next step, which is to seek out a lone human and impregnate that person through two tubular tentacles with stingers. Oh, and these babies? They emerge from the front of the host's stomach. So, Grant finds a woman named Brenda to serve as the incubator, after which he binds her and keeps feeding her raw meat. And meanwhile, Grant himself was becoming more and more alien with each passing minute. Like he was looking increasingly serpentine with tentacles for arms and a long tail and whatnot. Meanwhile, the incubator, aka Brenda, swelled up to an impossible size because thousands of worm-like parasites or slugs had developed inside her body. Eventually, the woman bursts, and these smaller slugs immediately seek new victims to take over by entering through the mouth. Once inside a human, they erase that person's will and reduce them to a zombie-like servant under total mental domination. And all of them share a hive mind, turning the alien infestation into a plague. Next thing we know, there are more breeders. But unlike Brenda, these breeders have become infected by the slugs and are willful. As for Grant, or the prime host, he literally absorbs their flesh into his own form and continues to grow until movement becomes impossible. Interestingly, the Long One seems to adopt certain aspects from the primary host. For instance, even in its most advanced form, the Long One may still care about the people that the prime host once cared about. And I would go so far as to say that the Long One is not entirely an animalistic being. It just wants to survive like all of us. But its survival means the death of others, which is not cool. In the end, it only dies after Police Chief Bill Party and Starla Grant fight back. During an attempt to turn Bill into a womb, Bill jams one tentacle into a propane tank, forcing high-pressure gas to fill the body of the prime host. Starla then shoots it. The gas ignites, and the creature explodes. With that death, the connected infected collapse too, although the post-credit scene hints that leftover alien matter may still be dangerous. Interestingly enough, the film does leave a few open-ended questions. For instance, it never confirms whether planets consumed before Earth were freed after his death, or whether there may be more than one hive mind in existence. A vague vision that one of the characters named Kylie receives when she almost swallows a slug seems to say that this species has done all this before on another world, where it killed and merged other life into one organism. But what happened after? And you know what? The worm creatures seen in the Collector's Collection in Guardians of the Galaxy are widely treated as James Gunn's callback to Slither, not necessarily the same canon species. I mean, both movies were directed by James Gunn. The Thing, 1982. Personally, The Thing is the most terrifying movie monster ever conceived, and it's not very difficult to imagine why. It's extremely difficult to know who, among a bunch of people, is waiting to kill and consume. This shape-shifting organism came to Earth and crashed in prehistoric Antarctica, after which it went into cryogenic stasis. It remained there for at least 100,000 years, possibly far longer, until the crew of Norway's Thule research station freed it in 1982. It destroyed that station and then moved towards the American U.S. Outpost 31. Its primary intent was to get loose and escape the scarcely populated Antarctica and move to a more densely populated region where it could have more hosts, more opportunities, and of course, the only way to do that was to reach the mainland. Now, biologically, instead of describing it as a singular creature, I like to think of it as an entire colony in itself. You see, the film strongly suggests that even separated tissue can act like an independent survival unit with its own survival instinct and intelligence. A single surviving cell may, in theory, rebuild the whole thing through absorption and assimilation. The creature basically consumes or infects other life forms, absorbs that victim's DNA, then reproduces a perfect imitation complete with memories and mannerisms. The imitation may be so disturbingly accurate that even the copied personality can appear intact, though details like Norris's apparent heart attack are still open to fan debate. Now, the Thing usually wants proximity with you in a place that's secluded for some time, because when it reveals its true form and attacks you, you may be shredded into pieces, your blood and bones spilling from your body. So, I'm assuming that it takes off your clothes before assimilating with you, and then once the complete replica has settled into its final shape, it presumably wears the clothes of its victim. That's the only explanation behind why the assimilated people don't have any blood on. However, dogs were also assimilated, and dogs don't wear clothes. I'm assuming that the final shape is the exact replica of the original's features, and the clothes are removed only because they can't copy inorganic or non-living things. When it attacks, it stuns prey long enough for assimilation to begin. The kennel creature is one example. It was a boiling mass that tried to absorb dogs. Categorically speaking, what it wants foremost is to assimilate and imitate every life form in its path until nothing else remains. It adapts to almost any environment except extreme heat or fire. Explosives work too, and heat-based tests expose it because its cells recoil from danger. But yeah, the Thing is sly and knows how to make a kill. If not for R.J. McCready's desperate counterattack, the world might have been infested by the creature long ago. The black goo pathogen, Prometheus 2012. The black goo, often labeled in expanded alien lore as chemical A03959X.91-15, is essentially a mutagenic pathogen filled with microscopic biological agents, and those agents are what give the substance its true power. This thing can create life, rewrite life, mutate entire environments and expanded lore, and wipe out an entire world. You can use it to seed a planet with life, and you can use it to destroy all life from a planet. Furthermore, in some expanded alien lore, writers connect the pathogen idea to other xenomorph reproductive substances, but that should be treated separately from the film canon. Anyway, let's assume you had the misfortune of coming in contact with the black goo. In such a case, one of three things may happen to you. You die, you help birth a dangerous creature, or you become a monster yourself. David, the synthetic from Ridley Scott's quasi-prequel Alien movies, studied it for more than a decade and came to the conclusion that it was a cleansing weapon, a way to erase fauna from a planet without causing any geological damage. But we also saw in Prometheus that the substance can create life as well. Naturally, its effects are tremendous and not entirely predictable. Mutation varies from host to host, although one recurring trait is accelerated healing. In the Fire and Stone comics, a scientist named Francis Lane proposed that a construct could act as a filler for the pathogen, and the test case was his own construct named Eldon. However, things did not go as planned for Eldon, as he became a hybrid of synthetic and an engineer. He went through some really grotesque mutations that even could infect others through his bites. Lane later concluded that the black goo has the genetic material of practically all life forms in the universe, and that's how the substance could mutate any living being it came in contact with. In Fire and Stone Omega, the goo had even transformed the topography of LV-223, and Eldon merged it with a mountain, and by extension, with the moon itself. Across the Alien franchise, we've come across numerous black goo-infected creatures, say the hammerpede, the deacon, or the trilobite. These three monstrosities, each more vicious than the last, were all the results of the black goo. And each of these organisms was a killing machine. Then there's the mutated predator, which killed its own brethren and was even cannibalistic in nature. In fact, the offspring from the last alien, Romulus, was also the result of a version of black goo. And we know just how terrible a killer that creature was. In fact, the film presents Rain as defeating it by ejecting it into LV-410's rings, though alien movies love leaving biological horror doors slightly open. Splinter Parasite. Splinter, 2008. The Splinter fungus is essentially a parasitic fungus of unknown origin. But, of course, since it's on this list, there has to be something obnoxiously deadly about the creature, right? So partially based on cordyceps-style horror, this fungus creates a body-stealing infection that appears to target warm-blooded animals and humans. The subject almost always dies a painful death, but then the fungus reanimates the corpse as a host. And this is why Splinter victims are often considered to be zombies. I mean, they look decayed, they have no real self left within them, and they hunt other people. However, the only difference between them and zombies is that these hosts are not after flesh for food. All they want are new victims to spread the infection. Now, the origin of the fungus is not very clear, but we do know that it can exist in forest ecosystems. You see, at some point, it infected a raccoon, and that raccoon made its way to a gas station, where the infected raccoon attacked the attendant and Blake Sherman Jr., and that's how the problem spread further. The fungus itself appears as a thin black quill of different lengths, and it changes the host's blood too. The blood becomes much darker and thicker, disturbingly alive in appearance. As for the infection process itself, after a person touches the fungus, a small black mark appears, and then the growth spreads from inside the body. Pain is initially negligible, but it continues to grow as time passes, and eventually becomes unbearable. Once the infection completes its course, the host enters a state of decay, and the host's muscle and bone begin to protrude through the flesh. It's all very nasty and visceral. Anyway, as far as asserting control is concerned, the Splinter fungus does not need to wait for the infection to fully complete. You see, it can also possess a part of a victim and turn that section into a sentient weapon. I mean, it kind of reminds me of Ash Williams' right hand becoming possessed by a Kandarian demon in Evil Dead 2. And in the Splinter movie itself, the same thing happens to Dennis's left hand. So his forearm twists, cracks, and moves on its own in order to reach Seth and Polly. One thing to note here is that if the infection starts closer to the head or any of the vital organs, possession happens faster. Furthermore, the infected people become sinks for incoming damage and can take a hell of a lot of punishment before finally going down. Another aspect is that the fungus tracks you through heat instead of sight. The movie confirms that even eyeless infected parts can sense possible victims, and the only reasonable explanation is that they track temperature. But this is also a weakness for the Splinter fungus because fire kills it, and its attraction to heat can lure infected hosts straight into the flames. Additionally, if a human's body temperature drops low enough, infected hosts may pass them by and look for warmer prey nearby. So yeah, much like the Thing and the Long One, the Splinter fungus also wants to spread. Clintar's symbiote, Venom, 2018. The Clintar, better known as the symbiotes, sit in that strange place between parasite and part. With the right host, they can become heroic. With the wrong one, they can become a nightmare. These amorphous neural parasites are sapient in nature and need to genetically bond with other organisms in order to survive and evolve. You could say that a symbiote on its own is powerful, but it's at its absolute best when it manages to find a host. And the stronger the host, the more powerful the symbiote is. Symbiotes are inorganic, multicellular life forms that were born from Null's living abyss after he experimented with his powers. Furthermore, they function as living extra-dimensional tesseracts, which means they need living hosts to anchor themselves to space and time. Now, you may already know that they love to eat brains, but why? Well, they require phenethylamine to remain healthy and sane, and this chemical is abundant in chocolate and human brain tissue. And that's why human hosts often have to slip into cannibalism in order to satiate their symbiotes' hunger for phenethylamine. These aliens reproduce asexually by budding off offspring after they consume enough nutrition. Once that happens, the offspring is expected to fend for itself. Usually, a symbiote gives birth once in its lifetime, although Venom is the obvious exception. Carnage is Venom's most infamous direct spawn, while the Life Foundation symbiotes, including Scream, Phage, Agony, Riot, and Lasher, are tied to Venom's broader offspring and hive lineage, depending on continuity. They could also create offspring through another species in unusual cases. For instance, Anne Waning, during her time as She-Venom, gave birth to Dylan because a piece of Eddie Brock's codex remained inside her and was absorbed by the fetus. Anyway, symbiotes evolve with each generation, and new offspring tend to grow stronger and become less sensitive to weaknesses. The point is, symbiotes are extremely powerful, and if they bond with an already demented mind like Cletus Cassidy, they become all the more vile and violent. I think Cassidy can be counted among the worst of the worst serial killers in the entire Marvel universe, and when he comes under the influence of carnage, the resultant danger is catastrophic, to say the least. The Control Bugs, Starship Troopers 2, Hero of the Federation, 2004. The Control Bugs are a separate species within the arachnid genus, but their method is super ugly even by Starship Troopers bug standards. These guys infiltrate the victim's body and burrow into the brain through any of the cavities they find. For instance, the mouth. Needless to say, they kill the host before using their bodies as puppets in service of the arachnids. At first, an affected person may look normal, which is what makes the Control Bugs more dangerous. Meanwhile, the bug feeds on the host from the inside, and as a result, the overall health keeps on declining. And once the body is nearly destroyed, the parasite either exists on its own or gets pulled out so it can do its thing again. The first known infected human was Technical Sergeant Ari Peck, and from him the infestation spread through Hotel Delta 185, so much so that only 3 people were left untouched. In Peck's case, you could see that he was compromised. He had a very odd skin tone and a bad odor, and developed a stutter that kept on worsening. As time passed, signs of decomposition increased, but Peck showed little concern over any bodily damage. Some of the hosts may also develop a huge craving for sugar. On the other hand, some, like Jill Sandy, may become so sly that they try a suicide bombing thing while singing in order to attract as many victims as possible. But if you consider Dee Dee Rake, she keeps part of her mind even after the bug enters her body, and she even uses adrenaline shots to resist the parasite long enough to fight back. Eventually, she helps stop the crisis and saves Dax, then takes her own life. But even that doesn't kill the bug. So yeah, Control Bugs are all about infiltration and subjugation, and they do whatever it takes to help their kind. The Ripley virus. Dreamcatcher, 2003. The Ripley is the main alien villain in Dreamcatcher, and belongs to a species called virus. They're a complex parasitoid macrovirus with multiple stages that basically want world domination. In Stephen King's novel, they're also referred to as a virus, while the younger form is called a Byram. In the film, the younger ones are called shit weasels. Now, the adult aliens look like deformed serpent creatures with legs. The younger Byram are smaller, legless versions of that same general form. Both have a slit-like mouth on the underside of the head that runs down the length of the body. With their mouths, they have hundreds of teeth strong enough to bite through steel. The Byram are especially vile because they can form inside a host's stomach and escape by eating their way through the space between the stomach and the anus, which of course kills the host in the process. Furthermore, both adults and the young can reproduce asexually through eggs, and those eggs hatch into even smaller Byram, which also have the adult creature's carnivorous instinct. Now, these creatures have a mental side too, and it's absolutely insane. I mean, the adult aliens have telepathy and can grant telepathic abilities to others in order to manipulate minds. They use this power as the Greys, which look very close to the classic gray alien from pop culture, except they have this really ugly pus-like skin. Their pus-like coating is tied to the infection biology of the species, and the story connects that gross physical texture to how the infection survives and spreads. A gray can also explode into a cloud of red dust, either when near death or as a final attempt to infect another host. It's kind of like an airborne form of infection. The Byram are stronger than humans and handle pain better, but they still die from most things that would kill a human. They're weak in the cold, which probably means that they come from a planet that was inherently warm. Parasitic worms. Trench 11, 2017. Believe it or not, unlike most of the entries on this list, the parasitic worms from Trench 11 are presented as wartime biological horror tied to German experiments beneath the Argonne Forest. Deep beneath the Argonne Forest, inside the German bunker known to the Allies as Trench 11 and to the Germans as the Wotan Complex, Dr. Priest discovers the truth after one of his crazed attackers is shot. A worm crawls out of the gunshot, and when Priest cuts the corpse open, he discovers that the body is filled with these nasty creatures. He figures that these worms are unnatural and quite possibly engineered. Now, we learned from Rainer, the German officer called the Prophet, that these worms were meant to kill livestock in Allied countries. Or at least that was the plan. However, they jumped species and began infecting humans. Rainer, instead of seeing it as a failure, took delight in it and deliberately bred deadlier strains. which essentially makes these worms a form of biological weapon. Biologically, the worms invade the body and take control from within. Victims do not remain themselves for long, and they almost instantly become insane, violent, and aggressive. And much like any host under the influence of a parasitic worm or fungus, the host sort of looks human, but the behavior of the host tells a different story altogether. Instead of world domination, these worms were designed as a biological weapon that could devastate enemy populations and food supplies. The Puppeteers. The Puppet Masters, 1994. The parasites from the Puppet Masters look like slugs and attach themselves to a host's back. Once bonded, they take control of their host. We later learn the extent of this control is such that they can not only kill a host, but even revive one if needed. The host may look normal, but of course, as it happens, their habits change completely. Like a chronic chain smoker might just stop smoking. Greenberg removes his glasses. The parasites can correct physical ailments, which tells us they do not merely pilot the body, they improve it for use. They also communicate with one another by touching their tentacles, and beyond that, they share telepathic communication. More importantly, they pass along knowledge. For instance, Greenberg leaves with everything learned by Sam, the infected Secret Service agents, and the rest. And later, a chimp infected for research confirms the same thing by typing a message that proves the hive shares collective memory. These parasites reproduce asexually by division, and the rate of reproduction is pretty damn fast. Behavior-wise, they're more into sly infiltration than using any sort of brute force like, say, the Thing. Interestingly, they even choose their target with great caution and thought. Like, they would first try to target people with some authority. They could even attempt to compromise the president through the Secret Service detail, and use infected people as obedient puppets. But yeah, they're not entirely averse to violence either. Anyway, these creatures want to control and spread their kind throughout Earth. And believe it or not, their strangest weakness is encephalitis. If someone has survived it before, the parasites struggle to infect them. Elmer. Brain damage, 1988. Elmer from Brain Damage is a small, dark blue, leech-like, and very, very absurd to look at. It's basically a brain eater of unknown origin, and his whole thing is giving you a filthy little bargain. So he gives a host an addictive blue fluid, and in return, the host helps him find human brains to consume. Now, anatomically speaking, Elmer has a rounded head, 2 blue eyes, suction cups under his body, and a mouth full of razor-sharp teeth, along with blue tentacles. Those tentacles extract human brain matter and convert it into the brain juice he feeds to people. That fluid drugs the human brain so powerfully that hosts become dependent on it. Brian falls for this almost at once. Elmer slips into his apartment, gains his trust, injects the fluid into his brain, and from there, Brian starts to drift away from his brother and Barbara, because that is how Elmer works. First he isolates you, then he owns your habits, and only after that does he turn you into transportation for murder. As for Elmer's history, his trail goes back to the Middle Ages, around the Fourth Crusade, when he was taken from Emperor Alexius during the sack of Byzantium in 1203. From there, he passed through a Venetian mercenary, a renegade Borgia cardinal, Manuel Peralta in 1699, a Portugal admiral off the Barbary coast, a young midshipman in Africa, a Matubu chief, and later a German munitions tycoon in World War II. After Berlin, he moved from host to host for more than 30 years, before Morris and Martha ended up with him and kept him alive on animal brains. Elmer eventually grew tired of that diet and escaped their bathtub, and went into Manhattan looking for better food. I'm sure you have, by now, understood what this ugly alien basically wants. He wants brains, and he wants someone else to take the risk for him. Dude even acts polite and super friendly, but he has no real care for Brian at all. He sends him on walks, and then lunges from his pocket to eat an officer's brain, and later kills a woman on a nightclub roof the same way. When Brian begins to understand the truth, Elmer tightens the leash. He talks like an owner, says Brian belongs to him, and when Brian tries to resist, withdrawal hits hard. Hallucinations tear at his mind, and Elmer takes pleasure in that suffering. He even tricks Brian into killing Barbara without Brian fully knowing it. So yeah, that was pretty much it for this video, guys. I'd also like to mention that the mutated fungus from Cold Storage, the upcoming Contagion horror movie starring Liam Neeson and Joe Keery. Based on what's been reported so far, it sounds like a fun addition to this kind of body horror infection story, and you should totally check it out if you haven't already. If you liked the video, please consider hitting the like and subscribe buttons and ringing that bell icon. Those 3 small clicks from you will help us tremendously in bringing you more awesome videos. Have a good one, stay safe,